I think even just starting about how you found your own mission, I think what was really interesting is that you really have a very clear idea, which is, you have a calling to help early stage companies scale their teams, and that's somewhat oddly specific. And so again, just how did you kind of arrive at that as your mantra?
I think first and foremost, your first job is a first job, and you learn a lot in that job, and it gets you to your second. And I think over time you start to hone in on what you really care about. But I studied English, right? I was not a technical person in college. Worked in the admissions office where I went to university, and so it was a pretty natural parlay from that position into something more formal and higher ed when I graduated, and loved that. I think it was relationship oriented. I led some admissions work for a small liberal arts college outside of Baltimore, but I think I realized pretty quickly that while I liked the education space, it didn't quite have the intensity and maybe like the fast moving nature that I actually witnessed in Silicon Valley, having grown up in Menlo Park. I work with founding teams of 2 or 3, like brilliant teams, amazing products, well-funded, who are just getting going. And I help them think about kind of their recruiting strategy from the earliest days, and hopefully put in place a foundation that helps them hire great people, right, moving forward and raise the next round. So long way of saying that it takes a while to get there, but I think the most important thing you can do in figuring out kind of your long-term career positioning is not to rush it, but to, when you have moments of conviction, kind of lean into it, right, and pursue that path. It made no sense looking from an outsider's view for me to leave Dropbox, right, in their hyper growth stage and go to something like Wealthfront. But I knew that the work for me there was more attractive, and that ultimately any sort of like cash trade-off I was making would benefit me in the long run.
As a recruiter, it seems more and more that people job hop more frequently.
Yes.
So are you, as a recruiter, is that something that's on your antenna of like, I want to make, again, obviously you're not saying that they're going to be a 50-year employee, but are you looking at it as like, we want to make sure there's at least a 2 to 3 year runway with this person, that I would almost, and I think you mentioned this, but the idea of like, we want to de-risk the hire because you have to put so much effort into it.
It's a huge benefit when you're part of your story, doesn't matter again whether you're an engineer or a salesperson, demonstrates significant tenure at one place that includes like successive roles, right? Like essentially people who are maximizing the opportunity of working somewhere. So, 4 years at one company where you go from associate to senior associate to manager to senior manager, that is powerful, right? Even at companies that are look like they're doing great from the outside, it's messy at a startup, it's up and down. And if you can stick it out, right, just showing that like resilience, that grit, that's huge. It means that you're probably gonna maybe do the same thing when you join our company.
How do you build trust with an interviewer during that kind of initial? Because there's actually a lot of studies that show literally in the first 90 seconds, of a meeting, that trust forms or doesn't form. And so I was curious, do you have any thoughts on that?
The most important thing you can do to establish trust is to be honest and to be humble and to not overinflate what you can accomplish. And so, people who really succeed are able to communicate, yes, their superpowers, but also can say without fear of retribution, yeah, I don't love doing actually that kind of work, right? Like that's not my sweet spot. Or here's an area where I'm trying to improve. Or if a question is asked and you don't know the answer, it's fine to sit on it for 5 seconds and say, not that familiar with that, but based on what you've asked, here's what I'm deducing. Maybe ask some clarifying question to get to the heart of the matter. You never want to pretend like you know about something on an interview. The opposite is certainly much better.
You've got some really interesting thoughts just on the future of work. So I was wondering, obviously we're going to go into a bit of highly likely a bit of a recession, but over the long term, like, how do you see the future of knowledge workers evolving here over the next couple of years. So like young professionals, typically the first 10 years of your career. So again, obviously you're not exactly, no one's Nostradamus, but how do you see that workforce, that knowledge worker evolving here kind of the next 10 years or so?
I love the question because I think it's a super current question. And I think one that's been, I think like answers are being looked for faster than they might have been because of the pandemic, right? And because like all of us had a chance to sit back and be like, oh my God, like, do I hate my 9 to 5 or do I like my 9 to 5 or do I need to get out of this 9 to 5? And so actually at Unusual Ventures, one of the main thesis investment areas for us is around kind of future of work, right? And in often cases, marketplaces. And actually one of our companies is called Contra, and they're doing a lot of really cool things in the space. But to kind of zoom out here, I think, for the first time, really, since I've been working, we're going to start to see new grads who are exceptional, who might have typically gone on to iBanking or consulting or any number of prestigious roles right out the gate, actually begin their career by doing temporary work or part-time work or fractional work or contract work. And that's because a movement is happening where kind of non-full-time workers are no longer seen as less than, but actually can be seen as greater than, because they know their skills, they know what they're great at, and they want to apply that in a lot of areas.